Dr. Z, on today's show, we're going to interview Kevin Freeman. Now, Kevin Freeman, he's kind of a big deal. He has his own.
Big deal. He's not
he has his own show on the Blaze Network.
Blaze it up.
And I feel like on today's show, he answers the questions that I ask him in a way that lets you know he really knows
what he's talking about.
Right. And so we talk about the 5 things on today's show that nobody should be talking about.
Well, you're not supposed to be talking about.
We're not supposed to talk about George Soros.
No, gosh, no.
We're not supposed to talk about 5G.
Oh, no.
The new phone network. We're not supposed to talk about the Chinese influence in the U.S. government.
Oh, no way.
We're not supposed to talk about the Ant Company. Shh. And we are certainly not supposed to talk about Hunter Biden, Antifa, and the Black Lives Matter organization. We can't talk about these things.
You're not supposed to.
But yet we do.
Oh, wow. We go there.
Folks, if
and
you...
it will open your eyes.
Today's guest, folks, Kevin Freeman. He's the host of the Economic War Room on the Blaze.
Right. And listen, get your pause button ready, because if you don't, your brain might explode.
All this and more on today's edition of the Thrive Time Show on your radio and podcast download.
Get ready to enter the Thrive Time Show.
We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
We started from the bottom, now we're on the top. Teaching you the systems to get what we got. Colton Dixon's on the hooks, I break down the books. Z's bringing some wisdom and the good looks. As the father of 5, that's why I'm a dive. So if you see my wife and kids, please tell them hi. It's the CNC up on your radio. And now 3, 2, 1, here we go.
We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get.
Yes, and yes.
Oh.
Dr. Z, it is ecstasy when you are next to me.
You know it.
And occasionally we get a guest on the show who is kind of mentally intimidating to me.
Oh, yeah?
And that would be right now.
Oh,
Kevin
wow.
Freeman, welcome on to the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you all doing?
Brother, I'm excited to have you on the show. I watched your interview that you did with Glenn Beck. That was episode 34 that came out about a year ago. And you dropped so many knowledge bombs per capita. I want the listeners to be able to go and watch your stuff. Where could people find you if they want to watch your show? Because your show is amazing.
The starting point would be economicwarroom.com. And
it
from there, you can subscribe to the Blaze if you want to get all it includes Glenn Beck and Mark Levin and Steve Deese and Phil Robertson and Steven Crowder and all the great Blaze hosts. But you can also get a lot from our YouTube channel, and if you start at economicwarroom.com, you can find all of it.
And can you share with the listeners out there that aren't super familiar, what is the Blaze Network, and how does that work? Is that a pay service? How can people learn more about that, and what does it cost?
Yeah, the Blaze Network is a pay service. It's like $10 a month or $100 a year. If you go to our website, economicwarroom.com, or use the code word ECON, you'll get a month free and $20 off or something. I don't know what this current special is, but you'll get a discount and you'll get a month free. Blaze TV is what Glenn Beck started when he left Fox. It was GBTV for a while. He rebranded it as Blaze TV, and then he merged it with CRTV, which is Mark Levin's baby, that was Conservative Review Television. And so now it's much larger. I think it may be the largest conservative pay service available in the country today.
Now, you are obviously a host on there. You have your own show. How did you and Glenn first meet? I mean, what was that connection like?
Oh, well, I met Glenn back in 2012, I guess, 2012. And what happened is someone in the Pentagon sent him a copy of my super secret research that I had done on economic warfare. And he didn't know me at all. He just started reading it on the air. And a friend of mine that lives in Tulsa called me up and said, "Hey, you're on Glenn Beck's show right now." And I said, No, I'm not. I was actually on Maria Bartiromo's show, which is CNBC at the time. And he said, "No, you're on Glenn Beck." So we had him turn the channel in the CNBC studio to Fox, and there he was reading my research.
Now, Z, what we're going to do right now is I'm going to start to, Kevin, I'm going to bring up some unspeakable things that we're not supposed to talk about.
Uh-oh.
So, Kevin, if it's okay, I'm going to kind of whisper, and I'm asking our 500,000 listeners to not share this with more than 5 people. James, does that sound fair? You're an attorney. Does that sound fair?
Sounds fair.
Okay. Kevin Freeman, George Soros We can't.
Oh, we don't talk about that.
You got to stop right there.
George Soros. Let me try again.
Yeah.
George Soros. You've heard on TV. It's crazy on Fox. A couple people tried to mention his name. See, they tried to say the name, and then all of a sudden they get cut off. Tell us about George Soros.
Yeah, well, I mentioned actually Islamic radical terrorism in 2012 on, I think it was an interview. It wasn't Glenn Beck, it was another interview. But Media Matters, which works for George Soros, immediately sent me threatening emails to my wife, and they didn't directly do it. Actually, they mentioned what an Islamophobe I was, and then there were minions that followed them that did. George Soros has been around a long time, long time. If you take a look at him, you'll see. And he has a view of the world that he wants to perpetrate, and he has put some of his estimated $20 or $30 billion toward that end. He has influenced political races. He was a huge supporter of Hillary Clinton. He was a huge supporter of Barack Obama. He said he would spend half his fortune to get George Bush out of the White House. He's a hater of Donald Trump, and he has influenced local elections, DA races, and everything else. And he's funded lots of interesting groups that don't tend to, in my opinion, like traditional America.
What does George Soros want? I mean, Newt Gingrich, this is the former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. If he can't speak about him on Fox News, I mean, what is it that is so unspeakable? Why can't we? What does George Soros want?
The big push is if you say his name, then you must be anti-Semitic, because it happens that he is Jewish. Although he's not practicing, he doesn't seem to have any belief in the faith, but he's ethnically Jewish. And so you get attacked for saying his name because it's, quote, anti-Semitic. Of course, most of the people that don't care that whether he's Jewish or not Jewish, what he wants is a remaking of society. And the remaking of society, he calls it the open society. What it would be is, globalist. It's a nightmare for traditional patriotic Americans. It's a globalist. It is potentially very repressive on patriotic type actions, although it's very open on drug use and broad sexual things and open borders and all of these things. And he seems to be behind all of those things that would be a nightmare for patriotic traditional Americans.
Z, I want to talk about on today's show 5 things we can't talk about, but I want to talk about them.
Okay.
So the first thing we can't talk about that we just talked about was George Soros.
His name. Okay.
Okay. Second thing is, Kevin, I want to get your take on this because I've watched some of your interviews, some of your shows. Freaking me out a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Freaking me out. You
bit.
don't listen to his shows before you go to bed. 5G. What is 5G? Educate us about the 5G network, because what you were saying on your shows was freaking me out, and I'm just now to a place emotionally where I can even talk about it. Talk about 5G.
Well, 5G is, in the simplest terms, the next generation of wireless technology. We went from 3G to 4G to 5G. But hidden behind that is the fact that this next generation of technology allows for everything to be held in the cloud and your device to be merely connected to it, which allows for some really cool stuff, Internet of Things type stuff. If you want to, for example, if you're on the phone and you drive away from your house, you'll notice you have this switch when it goes off of your home Wi-Fi, and then you have a lag and a loss, and it goes out onto the cellular network. The bandwidth on the cellular network has historically not been fast enough to enable you to operate things like drones and all sorts of things that you would want to operate ubiquitously. And so you could have a robot in your house, but when it walked away from the house and it was no longer connected to the faster Wi-Fi, it wouldn't be able to operate. Well, the Internet of Things and 5G allows that to continue to operate, which is cool, and you can do a lot of wonderful things. But it also allows for ubiquitous spying on individuals. It allows for all of your stuff to be not on your device, that you've got a passcode on your device to make it so secure. It actually all goes into the cloud somewhere, and then it's very quickly passed back and forth with your device, Well, that allows for very easy hacking. It allows for very easy, if the creator of the equipment that does 5G is China, for example, it allows the Chinese government to have access to everything that you do. And it gets into nightmare scenarios. Again, we went with one nightmare before. If you ever saw the movie, what was it? There was a movie about, it wasn't Network, but there was a movie about the beginnings of the internet, and said, oh, well, they could shut off your respirator in the hospital. They could give you the wrong medicines. They could do this. Well, they can do it at lightning speeds. It is a real and clear and present danger to America, especially if China, who manufactures most of this equipment, is allowed to dominate 5G.
Okay, see, that's even less settling than I thought.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to get a tinfoil hat. I'll be right back.
This thing is, Kevin, everything he's saying is true. It just freaks me out. Okay, so the Chinese influence in the U.S. government. See, you and I, we went out to a great restaurant. Called the Cardinal Club.
Yes.
They have a red door. And because of all this crazy communist stuff, I'm being serious. I see the door right away. I'm thinking, red. That reminds me of Red Dawn, which reminds me of Patrick Swayze, which reminds me of my interview with Kevin Freeman. No.
Oh,
no.
Where's the tinfoil?
I don't want to know the answer, but I have to ask: how much of the Chinese invasion, how much Chinese communist influence, is there in America today, Kevin?
Well, it's extraordinary. And they've taken, for example, in 2014, we did the largest initial public offering in history, and a group called Alibaba raised $25 billion of American money. They turned around and took about $25 billion of American money and invested in Zazzle and Lyft and a bunch of other internet startups, and they bought up technology, and they also began to influence in Hollywood studios. And what their influence today, and they created a bunch of Confucius institutes around the country in education, higher education, like colleges and universities, and they also put some in high schools. And they began to just dominate what you could think or say or do about China. So Tom Cruise has a new Top Gun sequel coming out. He wears his jacket with the patches on it. They're not allowed to put on the patch for Taiwan. They're not allowed to put on a patch for Japan. Why? Because the Chinese censor said no. Richard Gere, it barely gets movie roles after being one of Hollywood's top stars. Why? Because he's friends with the Dalai Lama in Tibet, and China says no. They don't allow Winnie the Pooh. You go to the Disneyland park in Beijing, and you can't see Winnie the Pooh there because somebody said he looked like the Chinese communist leader Xi Jinping, and they said, well, he looks like Pooh, and so they literally control all levels of thought as far as they can. So if you're a university and you've got a research contract with China, they won't let you speak bad about China because you signed this agreement when you put the Confucius Institute in place. So they are literally trying to control the media. They control a lot of the news papers and a lot of the news sites because they buy full price advertising and they put these sections in the newspaper. So the influence from China is severe.
Is this shocking to you at this point? I mean, I just want to get your take on this, Kevin. Is it shocking to you that Harvard has some of their top people working for the Chinese government? How intense is the Chinese invasion at the university level?
It's extraordinary, and it's not shocking because I read their book. There was a book published in 1999 by two senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army titled Unrestricted Warfare. And it is, they said, basically anything goes, and the goal is to subvert America without firing a shot if possible. And included among those is to infiltrate the universities, infiltrate Wall Street, infiltrate Hollywood, infiltrate anything that impacts or affects Americans. And then they've succeeded in that you can't talk about China just like you can't talk about George Soros. And they've bought a lot of people. You'll find a new Chinese spy every week or two on the Justice Department website, whether it's academic or Wall Street or whatever. And the bottom line is that they have recognized that to displace America, they have to take down America culturally, economically, and so forth.
Okay, Z, we can't talk about George Soros, but we talked about it.
We did.
5G, we can't talk about it. We talked about it.
We talked about it.
Chinese influence in the government, we can't talk about it, but we did talk about it.
We did talk about
I
it.
do want to ask you, Kevin, about the Ant Company. Now, I've been looking up this Ant Company, this Ant Group, and the Ant Company is a Chinese company that's freaking me out. It's called the Ant Group. Could you tell us about the Ant Group? Because this thing is freaking me out.
Well, this is a big part of Chinese influence is that they buy off people here in order to get American money. And I'll give you, we can't talk about Hunter Biden. I don't know if you had him on your list, but Hunter Biden is no, you're not supposed to talk about him either because he took $1.5 billion investment contract from China when he was over hanging out with his dad on Air Force Two a few years back during the Obama administration. And you can't talk about the fact that he was kicked out of the military because he was a drug abuser and he got a dishonorable discharge, basically. But it's the same idea, which is they're trying to get American investment into China. And Alibaba raised $25 billion. The Ant Group, which is a subsidiary of Alibaba, which was founded by Jack Ma, who is a Chinese Communist Party member, they are going to offer an initial public offering, not in New York, but in Hong Kong and Shanghai, that could be 25, 30, 50, maybe even as high as $100 billion of money moved. And that's the current show on the Economic War Room, by the way, is what they're going to do. And what they manufacture is they have the financial transfer technology like a PayPal, an Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Visa, MasterCard, all rolled into one, and they're the dominant player with $18 trillion annually in transactions and 1 billion users, and they're about to take maybe $100 billion of Western money in that will enable them to create an alternative currency with China, the DCEP, which is Digital Currency Electronic Payments Platform, that is intended to displace the Western financial system. And we will be funding it.
See, it's not polite to boo your guests. But, you bring a guy on the show, you ask him questions, and he gives you the direct answers. And that's why he's taking the room down. If he would just give us indirect.
If he'd just be kind of wishy-washy.
Wishy-washy, we would be feeling better right now. I have one more topic I want to talk about.
No, not another one.
And then we're going to talk about solutions for these things.
Oh,
okay?
there we
So
go.
here we go. So,
okay.
So, topic 5, Antifa, Black Lives Matters, and Hunter Biden. So you hopped ahead a little bit on the Hunter Biden, but let's talk about this. Should we be worried about Antifa, Hunter Biden, Black Lives Matter? I don't think most people recognize what Antifa really is. I don't think people recognize the nefariousness of Hunter Biden getting a $1.5 billion of Chinese investment after getting kicked out of the military for drug addiction issues. And I don't think people realize that Black Lives Matter is actually funded by white people who hate our country. Can you break down Hunter Biden, Antifa, and Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, well, let's start with Antifa. That known as anti-fascist. Well, who's not anti-fascist? I'm anti-fascist, but I'm not at all about doing what Antifa stands for or has stood for traditionally. I mean, you can go back to Italy, you can go back to Germany, you can go back to a lot of places around the world, and there's been Antifa groups that have formed there. And they have historically had violent aspects to them. Certainly there's violence happening here. Joe Biden said they're just an idea. Well, I tweeted about a video of, here's an idea that's burning this building. Here's an idea that's burning this police car. Here's an idea that's hitting somebody with a bat. It is a very violent expression, which is not about preventing fascism. It is all about instituting Marxism. And you go to the core of Antifa and others, and they are pro-Marxist, and they are funded in part by foreign governments. They are not a friend. They may be designated a terrorist group. It is not it's not a good group at all. You can be anti-fascist and not be Antifa. They tie in with Black Lives Matter because they show up at the Black Lives Matter protests. Not all of them. And by the way, there are some Black Lives Matter examples where there are good, well-meaning people that show up and they meet with the Proud Boys and they actually say a prayer and hug and that sort of thing. So this idea that the media is telling us, Proud Boys are white supremacists over here and Black Lives Matter are the anti-racists. Well, the Black Lives Matter, some of them are anti-racist, and that's great, fantastic. Black lives do matter. People should not be subjected to racism as we've seen. However, there are elements of Black Lives Matter where you look at the founders and they admit that they are trained Marxists. They're organizers that have the intent and purpose of changing the system. And they had on their website until very recently that they wanted to get rid of the traditional family, and they wanted really upend traditional America as we know it, which goes back something similar to what I said George Soros felt he wanted, and something very similar to what China said in the book Unrestricted Warfare would be necessary to take down America. In fact, they even use the term that the end game is street riots and a political crisis. And that's right straight from the book they published in 1999. That's how you take down a superpower.
Do these idiots get together? I mean, does George Soros sit down with Hunter Biden? Do they sit down and have a plan? Do these idiots get together and make a plan?
I have no idea. Maybe they do. I have no idea. I know that George Soros is not a fan of Xi Jinping. I know that. He's been very vocal and public about that. However, I don't put it past George Soros to work with someone that's not his friend. You know, there statements that he worked with the Nazis to survive back in. They worked with Nazis to survive when he was a child. He might work with Xi Jinping to get Trump out of there. In the end, I don't think he believes that the communist system is the Chinese Maoist communist system is what he wants. So maybe they work together. It's hard to say, it's hard to know, but they seem to be pushing the same direction, at least at the current moment.
Okay, Z. Now we've talked about the 5 things we can't talk about.
Oh, my goodness.
Now we're going to talk about some solutions.
Please.
So, Kevin, I think we're close enough friends. I'm going to call you Special K now to bring the room up a little bit. We're close enough friends. I can call you Special K. Here we go. So I don't think President Trump was supposed to be elected because I think a lot of these people are shocked that they have a guy who's never ran for office in there who's not all about the globalist movement. Can you tell us what good things is President Trump doing, or I guess objectively, maybe you don't think he's doing good things. How is the world? How are these idiots, George Soros, Hunter Biden? How are they reacting to having President Trump in office?
Well, let's step back a little bit. Before President Trump said he was running for office, he was actually kind of loved by the media. He was actually kind of loved. You know, he had a successful show, The Apprentice. He got awards from people like Jesse Jackson, gave him awards for being the opposite of being a racist. And you know, he was seemingly loved. And rappers would sing, you know, about him, for example, in positive ways. But it was a shock. He first shocked the world when he questioned the birth certificate. You're not allowed to do that, and you could put that on your list of things you're not allowed to talk about. Is Obama's birth certificate?
Hey, real quick, do you question Obama's birth certificate? I want to get your take on that.
I have no idea where the man was. I assume he was born in Hawaii. However, the PDF file that they put up was ludicrous. The PDF file had you know. Come on, put a flat, clean PDF up. What they put up, my wife has done graphic arts for years. She pulled it down and she's like, this thing looks like it's pasted together. So the PDF example of that, I'm not saying he was born in Canada. I have no idea. I assume he was born in Hawaii. I have no reason to doubt that. I wouldn't try and disqualify him based on that. But the example that they gave was such a joke that you wonder, were they trying to tweak people, or what were they trying to do with that? Because it was ridiculous.
Trump here. You got Trump. He's in office. Kevin, I mean, are the globalists happy that Trump's in office?
No. Going back to Donald Trump. So he knows the game. He knows the inside. He's played it. He knows all the people that are involved, and he loves America, and he saw America go in the wrong direction. And so he stood up and he ran for office. I didn't support him initially. I thought, what does this guy know? I mean, I met him a couple of times on the campaign trail. He and I were speaking at similar events, and he always showed up early, and I was supposed to speak right before him, which was the prime speaking slot. He showed up early, bumped me to after him, and you know, the room empties out when Donald Trump leaves. So I was disappointed, and I supported Ted Cruz, and I thought, you know, what does this guy know about government? I have been so impressed with his ability to capture and understand the risk America is in, and his willingness to address the Chinese threat. First president in my lifetime has addressed the Chinese threat. He's willing to stand up and say what he believes. He stood up on I mean, the looting and the rioting, he stood up there. The guy is a threat to the globalists. They never expected him to get elected. Absolutely could not imagine that he'd be. They thought he was fun, and so they pumped him up during the Republican primaries and thought, well, we'll just destroy him when Hillary runs against him. And he stood up. And the American people said, we don't want this, media mind control, and we're not going to stand for it. We know Hillary had 30,000 emails on her homebrew server. We know that she was running bad stuff through the Clinton Foundation, and this guy, maybe he can clean house a little bit. So the American people bet on Donald Trump, and I think he's done a very good job. His unfortunately biggest mistake was he allowed too many holdovers early in the administration because personnel is policy, and that allowed them to have the foothold to do what is unquestionably a coup attempt using the FBI and the CIA and the intelligence community.
Z, Kevin Freeman knows the stuff.
He knows it.
The stuff you shouldn't talk about. He knows all of it. Z, surely you can paint him into a corner. Surely,
Kevin, if you're talking to a never Trumper, which I don't know that there's many this go around as there was in 2016, but there's still some never Trumpers out there. What would you say to them? How would you address them?
Well, first off, is depends on who they are, but most never Trumpers are so tied into the globalist system that they're fighting for their lives. It's existential. If Donald Trump wins a second term, it may be the first best second term in the history of a president. Generally, the president gets in, he does everything he wants to do in the first term, and his second term is, it's kind of going downhill. In this case, he's going to clean house, put people in, and put people in jail, we're hoping.
I hope so.
There was a literal coup attempt against him. Yes. You cannot manipulate the system as they did to try and spy on a campaign based on phony evidence, based on something paid for by the opposing campaign, and weaponize government and spend that much of the people's money and find nothing. You can't. People did wrong things, and they need to go to jail for it. And so President Trump's second term may be fantastic. And that never Trumper, what I would ask him is, why do you hate him? What is it that you don't like about him? And then I'd walk through the policies that they claim. Most all of it's going to come down to, I don't like the fact that he talks to people like he does. I don't like the fact that he interrupts in a debate and so forth. And none of it's substantive, at least for honest people.
Right. And that's what I find too. And then they have all the talking points, but they have no proof to back it up. He's a liar. Well, when did he lie? Tell me about his lies. And then he's a misogynist. Well, tell me why. Do you even know what a misogynist is? First of all,
he's a misogynist.
He likes to get massages. No, and they just kind of go through that to CNN talking points, and they really have nothing else to back it up with. And so, I think just asking questions and being polite and asking them to actually prove their points.
I have a question.
Is a good way to.
I have
debunk.
a question for you, Kevin. You work with Glenn Beck. What's it like working with Glenn Beck? Are you guys, both of you, do you sit alone quietly and research all day, every day? Are you guys playing dodgeball with wrenches? Is it a funny environment? Is it lighthearted? Is it intense? What's it like to work there at the Blaze?
Well, Glenn's studio and my studio are both in the same general vicinity, but we don't share buildings. But I've known Glenn for a long time, and he is a very studious individual. He cares passionately about America. I know his wife. I know his kids. They went to school with my kids for a while. He cares about America, and he will admit he was on the Ted Cruz bandwagon, and he thought Trump would turn into a fascist, and he says, I was wrong, and he's apologized for it. So he's willing to admit when he's wrong. He studies like crazy, and he puts out just incredible, well-documented, easily explained information, such that the mainstream media has to try and make him into a nut or silence him in some way, because if you sit down and watch him at the chalkboard, he knows what he's talking about, and he can prove it. He's got the facts to back it up. He cares about America, and he has brilliant understanding of what we're facing.
Final two questions.
Wait, hold a second.
Oh, yeah,
Kevin,
sure,
do you happen to know what happened when it took place that Glenn Beck changed his mind about Trump? Was there one thing Trump did or said that made the light switch go, oh, huh?
I think several things. One of them was when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem and kept his promise. That shocked Glenn because he's a big fan of Israel and loves the Israeli people, love him, and he loves them. He did one of his restoring big movements in Israel. But he also noticed that the way the media was treating him, there's no way he could be a fascist. He has the least potential to be a fascist of any person in the United States of America because everybody's watching him so carefully. And, he opens the car door a certain way and they'll call him a fascist. So there's no way that he would be allowed to take that assume that kind of power. And Glenn noticed that. And then he kept his word. He started checking off the promises of what he said that he would do. And Glenn watched him and said, this guy is real. I didn't believe it, but he's real.
Yeah.
Kevin, I want to ask you two final questions here. Before becoming Kevin Freeman, the host of the Economic War Room, before becoming the big deal that you are, what was your background? What were you doing previous to the show?
Well, I've always been involved in politics. In fact, my father in the 1970s was associated with the National Center for Constitutional Studies. And so I've studied the government and politics for a long time. But my father was in the investment business, so I followed him and went into the investment business. And really, I was managing people's money. I worked for John Templeton. We managed $2.5 billion private client group. We built that. I built it from scratch with my boss, Jerry Ledzinski, and a couple of other people. And I retired from that, was doing money management for friends and family. And then I noticed that there was a financial attack on the United States that happened coincidentally with the 2008 stock market crash. And I mentioned that to some friends in the political arena. They handed it off to the economic warfare people in the Pentagon. Rich Higgins was one of them. And they hired me to really lay out an economic warfare program. How do we protect America and what do we do going forward about the risk that somebody could crash our stock market and literally change the election?
Now, you have the mic. See, Kevin has the mic.
He's got the mic.
Kevin, you can say whatever you want.
Before you drop it.
And then we drop the mic. You drop the mic. So what do you want to say to the listeners out there? What's something you want to encourage them about, or a website they should check out, or a book they should read? Or what do you want to tell our listeners?
Well, since you give me the mic and you're not paying me for this, so I can say the truth. The truth is that there are two elements in this world. There's good and there's evil. And I'm a believing Christian. And I believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and that God has sent his son who died for us, and God's son who died for us is coming back again. And the earth is getting worse and worse and worse in preparation of that. And we're seeing hearts of men growing cold and growing fearful and all the things that the Bible predicted. So we're either going to, in my opinion, win this election and restore America to the plans and purposes that it was founded upon, which I think is a good thing, or, it's entirely possible that the one world system with the single world currency and everything prophesied in the Bible could come true, and Jesus is coming back. Either way, every listener should be prepared for the return of Christ, because I believe that will be the single most important event in human history. And I believe people should return to God. And if we pray and we seek God and turn from our wicked ways, according to 2 Chronicles 7:13 and 14, I believe that God will hear our prayers and restore our land, and we'll go on. But someday, Jesus is coming back, so we should prepare our hearts and we should prepare our nation.
Brother, I could not agree with you more, and I really do appreciate you being here on today's show. I know you're a busy guy with a lot on your schedule. So again, on behalf of the entire Thrive Nation, Kevin Freeman, thank you for joining us. And one more time, what's your website so people can go and check out your show?
EconomicWarRoom.com.
EconomicWarRoom.com. Kevin Freeman, thank you for joining us on the Thrive Time Show. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you both.
And now, without any further ado, 3, 2, 1.